Hold your breath. 70 feet beneath the flooded ruins of Miami, you are being hunted, not by scent, not by sight, but by the electrical rhythm of your own heartbeat. When the salvage vessel Goliath vanished, the military expected a routine recovery. Instead, the ship's black box captured something impossible. An 8-Hertz biological pulse vibrating through the dark water. And it wasn't just one. It was a synchronized network of 17 50-foot predators. Welcome to the Drowned Peninsula, where the invasive Burmese python didn't just adapt to the rising oceans. It became the ultimate architect of a terrifying new food chain. For generations, we imagined the drowned remains of South Florida as a graveyard, a silent landscape of submerged towers, broken highways, and empty rooms filling slowly with silt.
We were wrong. It was never a graveyard.
It was an incubator. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Burmese pythons were already reshaping the wetlands of South Florida. They arrived through escapes and releases connected to the exotic pet trade, disappearing into a subtropical landscape almost perfectly suited to them. They adapted, they fed, they multiplied. Then the water came. As global seas advanced across the low limestone shelf of South Florida, the Everglades changed. Freshwater marshes became brackish. Brackish wetlands became shallow sea. Storm surges reached farther inland. Mangroves climbed across drowned roads and wrapped their roots around abandoned foundations. For native predators, the rising saltwater was an extinction event. Without dry land, their eggs simply drowned. But the python bypassed this biological dead end. Forced by environmental pressure, generation after generation held their developing embryos inside their bodies just a fraction longer, seeking higher ground. Eventually, the eggshells thinned into mere membranes, triggering a brutal evolutionary leap. Viviparity, live birth. In a drowning world, the python didn't just survive the flood, it inherited it. Today, survey maps call the region the Drowned Peninsula. What was once Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Naples, and the southern edge of the Everglades has become a vast maze of warm ocean, mangrove forests, exposed upper floors, collapsed bridges, and submerged concrete canyons. Every broken window is a cave mouth. Every parking garage is a den. Every flooded tunnel is a hunting corridor. And across centuries of isolation and relentless selection, the snakes changed. Not into something magical, into something selected. The flooded cities created an enormous artificial reef system. Fish entered the streets. Marine mammals followed the coast. Migratory birds crowded the surviving towers. Nutrient-rich currents moved through abandoned neighborhoods and concentrated prey inside corridors designed by human engineers. The snakes that could exploit this environment survived. The snakes that could remain underwater longer fed more often. The larger animals dominated bigger prey, endured longer periods without food, stored more oxygen, and produced more developed offspring. Generation by generation, size itself became an advantage. The largest confirmed specimen measured more than 50 feet from skull to tail. A semi-aquatic Leviathan built for a city that no longer belonged to humans. Start with the skin. The smooth scales of its ancestors are gone. In their place are thickened, heavily ridged keratin plates coated in a mineral-rich biological film. Microbial colonies live across the surface of those scales. They trap calcium, sediment, silicates, microscopic fragments of the drowned city itself. Not enough to armor the animal completely, just enough to destroy its outline. Over time, the surface hardens into a rough mineral crust that survey teams call Biocrete. The snake does not grow concrete. It wears the chemistry of the city on its body. A motionless animal resting against a collapsed support beam can become almost indistinguishable from the ruins around it. At close range, sonar sometimes makes the same mistake. Beneath that shell, the respiratory system has changed as well. Snakes already possess elongated lungs. These descendants pushed that anatomy further. Expanded air capacity, denser oxygen storage in the blood, a powerful posterior air sac, a metabolism capable of collapsing into near idle while the animal waits below the surface. Their heart rate can fall to only a few beats per minute. They can remain submerged for hours, motionless, invisible. But the most disturbing adaptation cannot be seen. The ancestral Burmese python hunted partly through heat. Its facial pits detected infrared radiation from warm-blooded prey. Underwater, that advantage became almost useless. Heat disperses rapidly through water. Visibility in the drowned cities is often measured in inches. The old sensory world disappeared. So another one emerged. Along the lower jaw, thousands of specialized sensory structures began responding to microscopic disturbances in the water. The flick of a fin, the movement of a limb, the contraction of nearby muscle, and at close range, perhaps even the faint electrical noise generated by living tissue. Every living body announces itself. Every moving animal leaves a signal. And the largest, most rhythmic muscle in the vertebrate body is the heart. An animal swimming through a flooded suburb has no idea that somewhere in the darkness, coiled around a rusted traffic light or hidden against a submerged wall, something may already know it is there. Darkness is no longer protection. It is the hunting ground. The ruins completed the design. The Leviathans rarely chase prey across open water. They do not have to. They wrap sections of their bodies around structural steel. They anchor themselves inside elevator shafts. They hang motionless along broken facades. And when prey passes through the corridor below, they release. Tons of muscle fall through the water. The target is driven into a wall, a tunnel, a dead end poured by human engineers centuries earlier. The city does the rest. Which brings us back to the Goliath. 3 years ago, a private salvage vessel entered the northern edge of the Drowned Peninsula. Its contract was simple: recover archived material from a federal records facility submerged beneath 70 feet of water. 11 crew members went in. The vessel's sonar operator was Elena Vasquez, 34 years old, former Navy hydrographic specialist. 11 years spent mapping harbors before moving into private salvage. Her logs were written the way she had been trained to write them. Short sentences, no unnecessary adjectives, timestamps in the margin. And her first disturbing entry was not about a snake. It was about the silence. There were no birds. Not on the exposed rooftops, not on antenna towers, not on the broken bridge cables stretching above the water. Across 4 square miles of prime nesting structure, she recorded almost nothing alive above the surface. By the second day, the crew had stopped joking. On the third day, Vasquez's sonar began returning anomalies around the pylons of a collapsed bridge. Long masses, motionless, too continuous to be schools of fish, too irregular to be structural beams. She flagged them. Her supervisor logged them as sensor artifacts. The charter had a schedule. On the 4th day, they sent 2 divers down. Ray Salazar was the dive supervisor. Danny Okonkwo was 24 years old and on his first deep salvage contract. That morning, he left a paperback and a spiral notebook open on his bunk, the way people do when they expect to come back before dinner. Their objective was the submerged lobby of the records facility. Vasquez tracked them from the surface. 2 transponder signals. 2 blue dots moving slowly through a grid of drowned rooms. At 14:39, a third mass appeared. It looked structural. A thick vertical return near the edge of the lobby. Vasquez almost dismissed it. Then she checked the architectural schematic overlaid on her screen. The support was on the wrong side of a wall. There was no column there. There had never been a column there. Comms through 70 feet of silt-heavy water carried a delay. Vasquez called into the line. One word. Again. 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 Run. At 1441, Ray Salazar's transponder stopped moving. It did not drift. It did not sink. It simply froze in place and never moved again. Danny Okonkwo's transponder went upward, 40 feet in 9 seconds, far too fast for a controlled descent. It reached within 12 feet of the hull. Crew members ran to the rail. They stared into brown water. They saw nothing. Then Danny's transponder stopped too. But that was not the discovery that changed marine biology. That came later, when investigators recovered audio from the Goliath's hull hydrophone. The timeline did not fit the attack. The low-frequency pulses had not started when the divers entered the building. They had started 19 minutes earlier, before Ray Salazar's dive light ever entered the lobby. The animals were not reacting. They were arranging. The Goliath did not withdraw. The contract had already paid for the fuel. By the next morning, the vessel had drifted half a mile south. Vasquez began seeing returns rise from the deeper channels. The ship carried a low-frequency generator, standard equipment. A constant mechanical hum radiated through the hull and into the surrounding water. The creatures did not retreat from it. They moved toward it. One contact appeared, then 4, then 9, then 17. They stopped at a fixed distance from the vessel. As the Goliath drifted, the arc closed. When the vessel held position, the formation widened. When it moved again, they followed. For years afterward, researchers argued over whether Vasquez had witnessed coordinated hunting or coincidence. Then, the drones returned. Footage from different cities, different expeditions, and different years showed the same behavior. 2 animals stationed at opposite ends of submerged highway tunnels, one at each entrance, both holding position for hours while schools of fish moved between them. Neither animal attacked early. Neither animal abandoned its position. And in some recordings, one of the animals was much smaller, a juvenile. Researchers still debate what that means. Perhaps the younger animal is simply following instinct. Perhaps it is copying an adult. Perhaps what looks like teaching is only social coordination shaped by natural selection. But one fact is difficult to dismiss. The behavior is not random, and coordinated behavior requires information. Which brings us back to the black box. For most of the recording, the Goliath's hydrophone captured only generator noise and the creaking of a loaded hull. Then something entered the signal. 8 hertz, below the threshold of normal human hearing. You do not hear a frequency like that. You feel it. In the chest. In the bones. Your body reacts before your conscious mind understands why. Then a second pulse joined it. Then a third. More followed. The signals shifted, overlapped, moved into phase. Acousticians stopped counting individual waveforms. They started counting sources. 17. The same number Elena Vasquez had seen on her sonar screen. Snakes have no vocal anatomy capable of producing calls like whales or dolphins. But these animals possessed something else. Enormous bands of muscle. And sensory systems adapted to detect the faint biological disturbances created by contracting tissue. The leading hypothesis is also the most controversial, that the Leviathans were generating patterned pressure waves through synchronized muscular contractions against the surrounding water and structure. Not speech in the human sense, not language as we understand it, but information. 17 predators hidden in the silt, communicating through the same biological world they had evolved to sense, the pulse of a living body. The Goliath was found 9 days later. It had grounded against a submerged parking structure. The hull was intact. The generator was still running. 9 crew members remained aboard. They had not eaten in 4 days. None of them would go on deck after sunset. Elena Vasquez survived. She never returned to the water. She kept Danny Okonkwo's spiral notebook. There was nothing written in it. The consequences did not remain inside the Drowned Peninsula. Within years, marine insurers began rewriting policies for salvage operations along the southern Atlantic coast. The exclusion acquired an unofficial name, the Leviathan Clause. A standard list of named hazards might include hurricane, fire, war, piracy, and then, near the bottom, in the same plain legal type, constrictor activity. Marine insurers are already quietly stamping the Leviathan Clause onto every deep water salvage contract. But the true nightmare hasn't even peaked. As ocean temperatures rise, these 50-foot predators are expanding their territory north, claiming the submerged concrete canyons of Charleston, Norfolk, and the Chesapeake. So here is the ultimate question for you. How long until one of these leviathans glides into a flooded New York subway tunnel, coils itself in the pitch black, and waits? Not the way an animal waits, but the way a building waits. How far does this invasive empire spread before humanity is forced to declare war on the oceans? Drop your survival theories in the comments. Can we engineer weapons to hunt them, or do we surrender the coastlines forever? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for What If Animals. Because evolution doesn't stop at 50 feet, and the dark water is never as empty as it looks.